Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by White House reporter Haisten Willis.
Hey, Jim.
Haisten, there's the East Palestine issue, the Ohio train derailment, has become a major sort of PR problem and perhaps a substantive problem for the Biden administration. What's really going on?
Yeah, I think so. This has been a really unusual story in that it happened a month ago, and at first was not really that big of a national, certainly not a big national story, and then it's kind of become a bigger and bigger story in each subsequent week. And yeah, that keeps continuing. Yeah, I think it's been kind of a headache, as you alluded to, for the Biden administration. They at first kind of said, I think they wanted to leave it to local people, and they said it was being handled and that kind of thing. But again, as the seriousness of the problem became known, how many toxic chemicals had spilled into the street. There were animals that were getting sick and dying. There's just pictures of enormous, gigantic clouds of smoke and things like that. Began to become a bigger problem for them. And so, after a while, there were calls, for them to come visit. Why wouldn't they talked about this? Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg really come under fire. He didn't make any public comments at all about the situation for 10 days until it happened. When he did, it was a tweet. And Biden didn't comment on it, I think, for even longer than that. And then, of course, there was some capitalization, you could say, on the situation on the part of former President Donald Trump, who made his own visit before anyone from the Biden administration, or at least any of the top people, came and visited. It was classic, quintessential Trump. He had Trump-branded water bottles, and he stopped by a McDonald's and went and visited the area and things like that. People said it was kind of vintage, classic, 2015, whatever you want to say, Donald Trump. So, of course, there's a question about how much that really helped people on the ground, but he at least was there, and they saw him there. Buttigieg also made a visit the next day. Perhaps that did not go as well for him. He's been under a lot of fire just for his handling of the situation. He's been a little bit kind of coy and cagey with some members of the media, not wanting to do interviews, or at least not do them spontaneously and that kind of thing. He's a little bit maybe stiff and wooden himself. And then, of course, again, Biden. Part of the situation was that Biden had gone to Ukraine to mark the 1-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. While this was happening, there were calls or questions about that. Why is he in Ukraine giving money to a foreign government when he could be here in Ohio? So the political optics of the situation have been very tricky for the White House.
Yeah, they've really had a hard time with it, and as we're filming this, President Biden doesn't have any plans to go. Pete Buttigieg has been there, but after former President Trump, it is a state that went Republican in the last 2 presidential elections, but this has kind of not really gone well. At least the perception has not gone well for the White House.
Yeah, of course, there's always the issue with politics of perception versus reality, or perhaps perception being reality. And of course, this has been handled on the ground by the relevant agencies. The Ohio governor has been pretty heavily involved as well, but perception-wise, another Republican, and the new Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance was there yesterday as well. Along with Trump, but yeah, it's been definitely a PR issue for the Biden White House.
So you've written a story about a controversial rule that the Biden administration has, and they've positioned themselves as a very science-friendly White House, but some federal scientists are concerned that they might be under a gag rule on this administration. Talk a little bit about what you reported on.
Yeah, this is a little bit of kind of inside baseball, but I'll try to explain it in a way that's relatively accessible. But yeah, so the White House was proposing a rule that federal scientists would work under. And it's a big, long document, but there's a relevant part, it's only about a paragraph long, that says that they will not speak about their scientific research without authorization, basically authorization from someone higher up in the organization telling them whether or not they can speak, whether or not they cannot speak publicly or to a journalist or whatever. And then even if they get approval, they can only speak about their specific research or area of expertise. So if they're asked about some other topic, presumably under this policy, they would say, well, I can't talk about that. And so there's a lot of issues here. Basically, is this a First Amendment violation, right? Okay, you work for the government, but how much of your control of your own speech do you give away when you accept that paycheck from the government?
Sure.
So yeah, there's a few different science groups that are concerned about this. They're calling it a gag order or a gag policy. And of course, science has been really very much in the headlines for a few years now with the COVID-19 pandemic, the response to it, effectiveness of masks, effectiveness of lockdowns and vaccines. All of that has scientific research.
Sure.
And so, yeah, there's a question of who's allowed to dissent, who's allowed to speak, have their voice heard on those topics.
Is some of this motivated by the fact that during the COVID response, you often had people who were scientists or in sort of scientific advisory roles who were saying things sometimes that were different, maybe just marginally, but maybe substantially, than whatever the official guidance was at that time?
Yeah, so I think that situation may generate more interest in this policy, right? These policies, for better or worse, have been around for a long time. They're not always necessarily written out and codified the way this one is, but it's not necessarily a new event to have people working on under these kinds of restrictions. But again, interest may be higher in this right now, as you're saying, because dissenters were, in some cases, censored and shamed and that kind of thing. So maybe there may be more interest among the public to question this, I guess, to say, do we really need this kind of policy? Why can't a scientist speak out? Also, these are government scientists who are actually funded, of course, by taxpayers, by you and I.
Sure.
So especially in that case, okay, if we're paying for these people, why are they not allowed to speak their minds?
Mm-hmm. So finally, there's been a change made by President Biden at the World Bank. Who's been withdrawn? Who's been deposited?
Yeah, so David Malpass is the current president of the World Bank. He's under a 5-year term, started in 2019. He was a Trump appointee. He's going to be leaving early next June, almost a full year early. And the nominee that they have named is Ajay Banga, who is the former CEO of MasterCard. And again, there's definitely some politics at play here.
Sure.
So Malpass made some comments last September that were interpreted as being maybe not climate change denial, but not climate change friendly. He said, he was asked about climate change, how serious of an issue is this? And he said that he's not a scientist. He sort of kind of backed away from the questions. That led to accusation that he was not active enough on the climate change front. He says he's not being forced out, but either way, he's leaving almost a full year early.
Sure.
So Banga, on the other hand, is bigger on these types of issues. He's also worked with Vice President Harris previously on her efforts to reduce migration by addressing the root causes in Central America. So there's a background between those two as well. In fact, President Biden released a statement when Banga was nominated. Harris released her own statement again because they have a background working together. So this signals a shift, basically, assuming he is in fact nominated, that the World Bank is going to be focusing more on climate change initiatives.
So climate change is something in the Biden administration you can take to the bank.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Haisten. You can read Haisten and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.